Hello, thanks for joining Strictly Money at the News Forum. I'm your host, Saijal Patel. Welcome once again to our special Women in Wealth series. In today's show, we will discuss women entrepreneurship in Canada. Innovation in entrepreneurship is the backbone of our economy, and women, for many reasons, are choosing the entrepreneurship route. Yet, only 16% of Canadian small and medium-sized businesses are run by women. Making sure women can start and scale their businesses is not just the right thing to do, it's a smart thing to do. Research shows that if we saw just a 10% increase in women-owned businesses, we'd add close to $200 billion to our GDP. To discuss this and more is Wendy Cukier. She's a professor of entrepreneurship and strategy at Ryerson University, and she joins me now. Wendy, it's great to have you on today.
Thanks for having me, Saijal.
Wendy, so how would you describe the state of women entrepreneurship in Canada? I mean, 16% doesn't seem very high. Are we at least moving the needle?
It's really hard to say because of the impact of COVID. But remember, majority-owned businesses are only part of women's entrepreneurship. Almost 40% of self-employed Canadians are women. That's almost 1 million people. So there's a real distinction between majority owners of SMEs, about 100,000, versus self-employed women. And we both know lots of self-employed women who have very successful businesses. It's just they haven't gone the step of incorporating them. And so in that sense, you know, there are a lot of women in entrepreneurship. I think the bigger issues are the lack of access to financing, the barriers that are embedded into the system, and of course the impact of COVID, which has crushed many entrepreneurs, and women have been particularly vulnerable, racialized Black, Indigenous women, even more so.
Yeah, so can you explain how exactly has the pandemic affected women entrepreneurs?
Well, women entrepreneurs in Canada are more likely to be in services, in retail, in health and beauty, in hospitality. And those were exactly the sectors that were most affected. Women are less likely to be in financial services or information technology, for instance, which were the sectors that actually in some ways benefited from the pandemic. Women-owned businesses are more likely to be small, they're less likely to have employees, and they're less likely to have deep pockets. All of those factors made them more vulnerable. And then add to that the crushing burden of unpaid work, of childcare, of homeschooling. And it's very clear women have suffered terribly on multiple levels.
You know, it's interesting, Wendy, because I was reading that a lot of women entrepreneurs were unable to access government financing because priority was given to those who had the SMEs or had employees. And it really does speak to that inclusion piece, right? Because there's a lot of women who are solo entrepreneurs that may be running a small business, but they're still making a living.
Exactly. You know, the systems at every level, and this applies to financial institutions as well, were designed for men by men. And so even things like how you assess someone's risk in whether or not they're eligible for a loan are often based on hard assets that you're more likely to have in manufacturing, or on registered IP, which you're more likely to have in tech. And those are exactly the sectors women are underrepresented. We did see the government pivot and try to adapt to the reality that a lot of women entrepreneurs were not eligible for their programs, but it was systemic bias built into the system that people simply hadn't been aware of.
Wendy, we only have about 45 seconds to the break. Can you also speak to minority-owned businesses, how they were affected?
Black-owned businesses were twice as hard hit by the pandemic and half as likely to have access to financing. And if they were if they were also owned by women, it was worse.
Okay, and non-binary as well. My understanding they're affected. Why is that?
Well, because the stereotypes of entrepreneurship are highly gendered, and if you don't conform to the stereotype of Bill Gates or Steve Jobs, if you don't present yourself in a particular way, you're less likely to get access to capital, you're less likely to get partnerships, you're less likely to get supports.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll continue this conversation. Welcome back. Wendy, for those women who do want financing, why is it so challenging? I can't speak to the lending practices for the banks. You probably have a lot more insight than I do, but certainly we talk about VC funding, and we know that only 2 to 4% of women-led businesses get venture capital funding.
Again, it's a multi-layered issue. So some of it's structural. VCs have stars in their eyes when they see tech startups, even though we know that the failure rate for tech startups is very, very high. But VCs, governments think nothing of investing millions of dollars in an idea if it's in technology. So that's a systemic barrier that there is this bias towards tech. There is this bias towards certain kinds of businesses. Far less attention is focused on consumer products, even though, Kylie Jenner was a billionaire at the age of 20 selling stuff on Shopify.
Right.
So that's an issue we have to grapple with.
Yeah.
One of the other things is it's true that financial literacy is sometimes a challenge for women and some groups. And because of that, they're less likely to pursue credit. There's something called discouraged borrower syndrome, where people expect to be turned down, so they don't try. And the whole notion that you should build your business with someone else's money sometimes is not well understood. And some women really take pride in bootstrapping. And so there are issues there we have to consider. As I said, 90% of women entrepreneurs in Canada haven't incorporated their businesses. And incorporation is often required for access to certain kinds of supports. And then, frankly, there's the embedded biases in financial institutions and certainly in investment and VC processes. We know with VCs, they've done the experiments. Man and woman give exactly the same pitch. Woman is asked different questions and less likely to get money. And if she gets money, it's going to be less. So there's no denying that. We're digging in a bit on banking practices because many of the banks will say we treat everybody equally. But if your criteria are fundamentally biased, you have a big problem. And so they talk about the 5 C's, collateral, capital, credit, character, various things that are baked into the algorithms that are used by many financial institutions to decide who they'll give money to. And a lot of those have embedded biases in them, not just in terms of women, but other groups. Think about Indigenous peoples.
Yeah.
Many are on reserve. They don't own property.
That's right.
And when we look at newcomers, even my daughter, when she went to the United States, she had to ride on her partner's credit until she got established. So there are a lot of barriers that are not obvious unless you really dig in.
So Wendy, then how do you think funding needs to be designed or maybe tweaked a little bit to make it a little bit more inclusive?
Well, my friend Vicki Saunders has come up with a really innovative model with SheEO, but she also says, the best money is money that you earn. So access to markets and procurement, to me, are the strongest levers that we can access. And when companies say they're committed to women entrepreneurs, I want to know where they're putting their money. I want to know where government is putting its billions of dollars. So helping women get access to markets and customers, both domestically and internationally, that's the starting point for sure. Yeah. When it comes to funding and loans and so on, we have to think about more innovative models because the evidence, although we don't have a lot of the data, is the traditional ways of assessing risk disadvantage women. And in fact, women are more likely to repay their loans. And there are lots of examples of innovative models like SheEO, which hit 100% repayment rates.
Yeah.
We need to make sure that women are not being disadvantaged by higher interest rates. I was looking at a horrifying story of a Black woman entrepreneur who's now, got $1 million a year company, but she was forced to borrow at about 25% interest all the way along. So we need real commitments, and I think the government needs to use its leverage in terms of regulation and codes of conduct to
Wendy,
really push more transparency.
All right. I'm going to have to end the show. And in fact, Vicki Saunders is my next guest, so I'm glad you mentioned her. Thanks so much for coming on today.
Thank you.
Welcome back to Strictly Money. Imagine that you're a woman with a great idea to make this world a better place. You need some funding, except you can't get it because you're told your idea won't make the investor a fortune or that you don't play the high-risk, high-reward game. Well, worry no more because my next guest has found a disruptive way to finance and support women's business ambitions. Vicki Saunders is a serial entrepreneur and the founder of SheEO, and she joins me now. Vicki, it's great to have you on.
Happy to be here.
I'm really pleased because I have been following your work for a few years now. You started SheEO in 2015, if I'm correct. Can you walk us through what made you launch this unique model? What did you see that was broken that needed to be fixed?
So many things. But starting point, so I've been an entrepreneur my whole life. I've had literally every kind of funding there is, from loans, debt, grants, right through to taking a company public. And I've just witnessed the biases that exist in our systems and structures that lock out women. I mean, we're living in a patriarchy. There are so many biases out there. And so I wanted to find another way. And the vast majority of people that are writing checks they don't look like me. And so part of the thing is we're all very biased culturally, and we kind of look for pattern recognition for people who look like us. And then we want to support those people because we know them better. So there's a bunch of issues around that. But in general, I think we're in this moment in time right now where there's a very, very strong narrative of go big or go home, like win the entire market. And that's it centers and privileges people who kind of get up on stage and say, I'm going to disrupt the universe. And that person looks a certain way. We put certain people on covers of magazines, and many of them don't look like I do, or don't. And if you're like a Black woman, an Indigenous woman, a woman of color, it's way harder for you as well. So there's a lot of cultural biases that make the mix look the way it does.
Yeah. Well, it's so interesting because we had Wendy Cukier, who I know on just previously and was saying that, the financing world is designed by men, for men. Why does it not work for so many female entrepreneurs?
A lot of women entrepreneurs, I mean, first of all, I don't want to just go women equals X, right? Yes. We're broad. All so very different. Yeah. But the vast majority of women entrepreneurs that we work with at SheEO come at this from how do I make the world a better place? How do I solve a major challenge that I'm facing? And a lot of us focus around process innovation as opposed to product innovation. So we see the relationships between things. We want to solve for that. So we have a venture named Chenny who runs gotcare.ca. And her focus is on making a better experience for home healthcare. She cares about what frontline workers are paid. She pays them 30% more than the market does. And then she charges customers in their homes who are struggling to get healthcare at home 30% less. Now, imagine walking to an investor and saying, here's my model. I'm going to pay frontline workers 30% more, and I'm going to charge people 30% less. Most of them are like, excuse me, that's my money you're leaving on the table. Why would you pay people so well? Yeah. And she's like, I've got, almost 100,000 healthcare workers out there in her network because she treats them well. She pays them well. Therefore, they do better work. Customers are happy. And it's all possible within her business model. But most of the narrative out there is try and make as much money as possible by paying people the least amount as possible. And many women entrepreneurs don't think that's the future they want to live in.
No, Vicki, and I think you hit a very important point is not everyone wants to scale and be a billionaire, but it doesn't mean that they shouldn't get financing and grow their business. I wanted to get your thoughts on the pandemic and COVID. Do you think that has shifted something? Has it shut down opportunities for women, or on the flip side, has it opened up opportunities for women?
I think it shifted pretty much everything for all of us, right? What we agree on, like where you can work, how you can work, all of that has really changed. The supply chain disruption has been extremely punishing for small and medium-sized businesses. If you're not a giant company, you cannot deal with the squeezing that's happened on margins. Let me just give you one quick example. Yeah. One of our ventures, the Alinker, their website is thealinker.com, makes these bikes for people who have lost mobility, and they can walk this bike with their feet. It doesn't have pedals, and so it stabilizes you. You walk on the ground.
Wow.
Her bikes are made in Taiwan. She, prior to COVID, her minimum order quantity was 150 bikes, and she paid 30% up front, and they arrived within 4 months. So she was managing that.
That's
after
great.
COVID, 1,000 bikes are the minimum, and it will arrive sometime in the next 24 months, but not guaranteed.
Okay.
So just imagine that you have to pay 30% up front for way more, and then it takes 2 years for them to get here.
Welcome back. Vicki, just before the break, you were giving some amazing examples of some of the women who are in the SheEO program. Can you explain how SheEO, the model, works?
Sure. We have this really interesting approach where we have created an ecosystem. So most of the entrepreneur supports are someone writes you a check, you go off and do it yourself. And I'm looking at there's so many resources that are not built into our economic models that we've leveraged at SheEO. So we have a community of thousands of people per country that come together. So in Canada, we have women who contribute a small amount of money, $92 a month, and that money gets pooled together. And then we invite entrepreneurs who are working on the Sustainable Development Goals to apply. They have about $50,000 in revenue, somewhere between $50K and $2 million. So they're already up and running. They're out in market. They apply, super simple process. And then those thousands of women go online and they vote for the companies that they're most excited about. So it's a totally democratized process. And when those ventures are selected, they get a 0% interest loan from us. And then they get the support of all of us. So all of a sudden you've gone from individually kind of solving all the problems for yourself as an entrepreneur to being in this community of thousands of people who are how can I help? Yeah. So I'll be I have tons of connections. Do you need any connections to networks? Others are working at companies and could we be your customer? We use our buying power, we use our expertise, and we use our networks to help these ventures grow.
Yeah, and I love that because it really is about women voting with their dollars and deciding, who gets that money. Vicki, I love this premise that you have around radical generosity and abundant mindsets. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I think we're living in a world which is kind of hardened, right? It's do it on your own, suck it up. You have to make these things happen. There's a lot of fear out there, and we come at this from a really different place of we are here to help. So those women who've contributed a small amount of money also bring all these other gifts with them, as I mentioned, our connections, our networks, et cetera. And we share it openly as we want to. And it's all on your own terms. So you can join this community. If you have lots of time, you can get involved. You find a venture you're really excited about and you start to help. You just gift that time or space or network or whatever you have in abundance. I happen to have this crazy number of connections and thousands of people who owe me favors. So I can never use them myself.
Yeah.
And so when a venture says, do you know someone who works at, company X, I jump in and I support. And all of us get to contribute those things that we have on our own terms, in our own time.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. I really believe there's enough to go around for everyone. We're just not organized as a society to give what we have in abundance.
Yeah.
And so we're organized in a different way, and it's created all kinds of amazing outcomes for these entrepreneurs and for ourselves.
I so agree with you. Did you, this model's so unique. Did you experience a lot of criticism and pushback, and do you still get it?
Oh my God, totally. Not as much anymore because we have so much data to prove that this works. But in the beginning, I had to say a lot of imagine if. Imagine if people were actually nice to each other in a community and shared without expecting, prove it to me, Saijal, that you can do this, right? We're like, love what she's trying to do. How can we all help? It's a very different kind of vibe, right? I want to live in a world that exists with all these kinds of businesses that are paying a living wage, caring for their workers, running like zero waste businesses, really focused on sustainability. And so, literally everything that we have around us is made up and we can change it. So we're redefining what the economy can look like. We're redefining what it means to be in community together, where we're actually sharing with one another, trusting one another, and helping one another. It's very community oriented.
And there's 1,000 activators?
In Canada, we've had about 3,000 women who've joined and about 7,000 globally.
All right. Vicki, appreciate you coming on the show. If people want to learn more about it, where can they find you and find more about it?
www.SheEO.world, SheEO.world. See you there.
All right. Great. Thanks so much for coming on. Vicki Saunders, founder of SheEO. Well, that wraps up this edition of Strictly Money. You can catch our special Women and Wealth series every Sunday at 9:30 a.m. for the month of March. I want to thank National Bank for sponsoring Women and Wealth. And if you're a woman watching this and want to build your financial knowledge, I urge you to sign up for the National Bank's Invest in You conference, which I will be hosting on April 5th. I also want to thank my sponsors, BMO Asset Management and IA Clarington, for supporting Strictly Money and for being a champion of financial literacy and my work in this space. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.